NewsHour has been provided by ODS Health Plan, the group medical plan that meets the needs of more than 600,000 Oregonians by providing a broad range of medical and dental coverage and responsive service.
Good evening. I'm Robert MacNeil in New York.
And I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington. Following our summary of the day's news, we'll review the Noriega guilty verdicts with a journalist and two legal experts. Then a documentary report on the continuing ethnic strife in one of Yugoslavia's newly independent republics. Former Vice President and Democratic presidential nominee Walter Mondale joins us for a conversation, and Amai Wallach looks at an artist with an ear for jazz.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. PepsiCo. Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the NewsHour is also provided by AT&T. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and viewers like you.
Former Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega was convicted on 8 drug and racketeering charges in Miami today. He was acquitted of 2 lesser counts. Noriega was arrested and brought to this country in January 1990 after U.S. military forces invaded Panama and overthrew him. He now faces up to 120 years in prison. Sentencing was set for July 10th. Noriega had no visible reaction in the courtroom, but his attorney said he would appeal the verdict. He said one issue would be Noriega's status as a prisoner of war. In Washington, President Bush commented on the verdict at a White House photo opportunity.
I think it's a major victory against the drug lords. We're going to continue the fight against drugs in every way possible. But I think it's significant that he was accorded a free and fair trial, and he was found guilty. And I hope it sends a lesson to drug lords here and around the world that they'll pay a price if they continue to poison the lives of our kids in this country or anywhere else. And so, in my view, the case was a solid case, and I have not commented on it since it began in the court, but now that he has been convicted, I think it's proper to say that justice has been served. It was certainly worth bringing him to justice, certainly always worth it when you protect the lives of American citizens, and when the partial result of that, a part of the result of that is democracy in a country, it makes it doubly worth it.
We'll have more on the story right after the news summary. Robin?
In economic news, the Federal Reserve today moved to lower interest rates again. It did so by pumping more money into the banking system, enough to push down the Fed funds rate by a quarter point to 3.75%. The Fed funds rate is what banks charge each other for overnight loans. The Fed action sent stocks in New York sharply higher. After losing nearly 100 points in the last 2 days, the Dow Jones average closed up nearly 44 points on heavy volume. In the broader market, advances outnumbered losers by a 3-to-1 margin. Also today, new claims for jobless benefits were reported down 24,000 in the last week of March. The decline followed 2 weeks of rising claims. Meanwhile, the Labor Department reported wholesale prices rose just 0.2% last month. So far this year, inflation at the wholesale level is running at an annual rate of less than 1%.
Paul Tsongas said no today. The former Massachusetts senator said he will not resume his campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination. He had suspended the campaign just 3 weeks ago, saying he had run out of money. Last Sunday, Tsongas said he would reconsider that decision pending the outcome of the New York primary. But today he said that Bill Clinton's Tuesday victories in New York, Wisconsin, Kansas, and Minnesota had been decisive, and that rejoining the race at this point would only put him in the role of spoiler. He spoke at a news conference in Boston.
My name will remain on future ballots. If people wish to express support for my message and to seek to become delegates, that is their choice. But I will not re-enter the race. Preserve the message, yes. that we must heal this party as well. Both are noble purposes, and I hope to be part of bringing them both into reality.
We will talk with former Vice President and former Democratic presidential nominee Walter Mondale about the 1992 race later in the program.
British voters went to the polls today in what appeared to be the closest election in years. Television exit polls suggested the outcome could be a hung parliament, with neither major party winning a majority. Prime Minister John Major was among the first to cast a vote this morning. His Conservative Party faced the toughest challenge of its 13 years in power. It came from Neil Kinnock's Labour Party, which focused its campaign on blaming the Conservatives for Britain's recession.
There was another kind of political hardball being played today. It happened in the Russian Congress. We have a report narrated by Richard Vaughan.
Former communists stridently attacked Boris Yeltsin's economic reforms, which have left the country reeling from huge price increases. The president's aides scrambled to save his political life. They're trying to stop a congressional resolution that would strip their leader of his extra powers as prime minister. The proposal would remove the presidential mandate to rule the government without the normal parliamentary controls. The entire cabinet has said it will resign if the measure passes, because it means Yeltsin would lose direct control of his own reforms. If they fail to block the resolution in the legislature, which is dominated by former communists, Yeltsin supporters say they'll call for a national vote. In the Ukraine, angry demonstrators picketed a meeting about the future of the Black Sea Fleet. The bitter dispute has strained Russian-Ukrainian relations and threatens to break up the Commonwealth. Defense officials from both sides have been bickering about how to divide up the naval assets, including some 300 ships. The powerful neighbors have now suspended legal claims to the fleet in an effort to get the talks moving.
The U.S. and its Gulf War allies today warned Iraq against renewed military activities. The warning was delivered by the U.S. commander of the Allied task force in the region. Of particular concern was the movement of surface-to-air missile batteries and ground troops in northern Iraq near the security lines set up to protect the Kurds. A Kurdish leader said today there were signs that Iraqi troops were bowing to Western pressure and were pulling back. President Bush said today that he had absolutely no regrets about not ousting Saddam Hussein before ending the Gulf War. But he also told the American Society of Newspaper Editors that in hindsight, he might not have provided aid to Iraq before its invasion of Kuwait.
President Bush and Vice President Quayle reacted today to a congressional report which said Mr. Quayle had taken 4 golfing trips last year on military planes, accompanied by White House Chief of Staff Samuel Skinner, who was then Transportation Secretary. Since the golf tournaments were also political fundraisers, the travel was reimbursed at the cost of a commercial air ticket plus $1. But that amounts to a fraction of the cost of operating a military flight. House Democrats said it amounted to a taxpayer subsidy of political travel. The president and vice president had this reaction at a White House photo session.
Has the Vice President used his travel privilege?
No, he has not.
You think so, Mr. Vice President?
The president is right. Following the rules.
Is it valid for you to play golf on the taxpayer money?
We're fine with all the rules and regulations.
An employee of the House Post Office was indicted today by a federal grand jury on drug charges. The grand jury alleged he was part of a broad conspiracy to distribute drugs at the post office used by members of Congress. The indictment charged that crack cocaine and other drugs were exchanged for money and favors. The 32-year-old former stamp clerk has already been charged with embezzlement.
Roman Catholic bishops today released a pastoral letter denouncing sexism. It said discrimination against women is a sin. But it also said the church should continue its tradition of allowing only men to be ordained as priests. The draft document is subject to final approval by the National Bishops' Conference in November. It is intended as a policy guide for the estimated 55 million American Catholics. That's it for the news summary. Now it's on to the Noriega guilty verdict. Continuing ethnic fighting in Bosnia-Herzegovina. A conversation with Walter Mondale and an Amai Wallach essay.
The Noriega verdict is in, and it is our lead segment tonight. It's been called the most important drug trial in history. The president of Panama, ousted by U.S. military invasion and brought to justice in the United States. And after several days of tension over what appeared to be a deadlock, the jury came back today with guilty verdicts on 8 of 10 counts. They include racketeering, laundering drug profits, and conspiracy to import cocaine into the United States. The 7-month trial has taken many curves. At one point this week, the jury foreman wrote, "We have a serious problem. We are deadlocked." That sent shockwaves from Panama to the White House. Spencer Reese has covered the trial for Newsweek magazine since it began. Spencer, describe the scene in the courtroom today when the verdict was announced.
It was very calm, Robin. The court, through this whole thing, there has never been the sort of public clamor that most trials of this sort had. In fact, oftentimes this has been conducted in a half-empty courtroom. Even today there were empty seats, and it was all basically a professional crowd. It was journalists, lawyers, interested parties, Noriega's family, his wife, his 3 daughters were all there. When the jury read its verdict, or when the bailiff read the jury's verdict, Noriega himself was motionless. He absolutely did not move a muscle. He had that little wireless headphone in his ear that he heard the translation from a court translator, a court interpreter through, and he stayed eyes ahead, straight ahead, right through till after the whole proceedings were over. And in fact, I don't think he ever, as far as I could see, turned around and acknowledged his family even after it was over.
Yesterday, it was a threatened hung jury. Today, it's unanimous convictions on 8 serious charges. What happened as far as you can tell?
Very clearly, the jury went hook, line, and sinker for the government's case, and were it not for that holdout juror, we probably would have had this verdict 2 or 3 days ago. I think that surprised everybody. I think most of us expected some kind of conviction on some of the counts, but I would imagine that even the prosecutors, and I dare say the White House, were surprised to get 8 out of 10. I think that's a big victory for them.
Do you know who the holdout juror was and what the problem was?
Speculation only, and it centers on one of the woman jurors, and in fact the only Latin on the jury, which brings into question the defense's theory in jury selection of avoiding Latin jurors on the theory that they would be more likely to convict. It appears that it was a Latin woman that was the holdout, and she was the sole Latin juror.
On what do you base the speculation that she was the holdout?
There were several hearings in the last couple of days in which the judge attempted to give additional instructions to the jury to help them through this deadlock that they had earlier said they had. And during the back and forth between the foreman and Judge Hoovler, on a number of occasions, the jurors all seemed to look around toward her, and she was also spotted by some sharp-eyed observers with what appeared to be almost tears in her eyes. So the suspicion was that she was holding out for at least a partial acquittal, or more of an acquittal than the rest were willing to go up with.
It's been widely reported by reporters covering the trial, I don't know whether you're among them, that the government case looked weak, that its witnesses were of questionable credibility, that it was mostly based on circumstantial evidence, and yet the jury seems to have had little trouble with it. How do you explain that?
Well, they used a very broad brush, and that was always, the government's contention was this is just a drug trial, don't consider anything other than the evidence. But in fact, quite clearly, the jury did take other things into account, and the best evidence of that is their willingness to convict after only 2 days in a trial that lasted 7 months, that generated 17,000 pages of transcripts, that generated 700 exhibits, and all of that they dealt with very preemptorily. And the only 2 counts that were tossed out, oddly enough, were the 2 most recent, in chronological terms, events, the so-called Krill count about a boat of that name that was supposedly loaded up in Colombia and passed through Panama, was supposed to pass through Panama on its way to the States. That was in 1985, incredibly. And in fact, all the events he's been convicted of go all the way back to 82, 3, and 4. So I think when President Bush crows about this as a victory in the war on drugs, he needs to remember that none of this was anything that happened even remotely resembling real time right now.
So can you put into plain English what this jury has convicted Noriega of doing? What of actually helping cocaine to get into this country and making money out of it?
Yeah, the prosecution's term, which I assume stuck, was that he was a bad cop. in the sense that he had been a useful ally. He had even on occasion turned in other drug traffickers to American authorities, but that at the same time he was being paid by the Medellin cartel to allow drug traffic or drug traffickers to work through Panama. And they seem to have accepted that argument despite the defense's counter-arguments that all of this was happening unknown to General Noriega, and that if there were drug traffickers operating in Panama, they were operating there in the same way that they operate, say, in South Florida, which is despite the best efforts of law enforcement authorities.
Now, tell us what the defense plans to do about appeals.
Well, obviously there are going to be appeals of this, and it's a real grab bag. They're starting right with the circumstances that he was brought to the United States under, his capture, the question of whether a U.S. court has jurisdiction at all over him because of the fact that he was brought here coercively, whether or not as a head of state he could have had sovereign immunity. All of these were issues that Judge Hoovler disposed of along the way during the trial and made rulings on. All those rulings will now be subject to challenge. In addition to that, there are a number of other questionable activities during the trial. There was the famous CNN tapes episode whereby some conversations between Noriega and his defense team were leaked to the television network. There was a variety of things like that that could all be subjects of appeal. And his defense team, or more likely an appeals lawyer, a specialist rather than a trial lawyer of the kind that did the case now, will look at this 17,000-page transcript and try and find holes that can be driven through.
Well, Spencer Reese, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Noriega's attorneys steadfastly maintained that he was a victim of U.S. politics, not a drug lord. At a news conference in Washington this afternoon, the head of the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency was asked whether his arrest has had any impact on drug trafficking in Panama.
I think I can state with a fair degree of certitude that the degree of drug money laundering that had existed under General Noriega's regime in Panama has been reduced, perhaps even drastically reduced since the removal of Noriega. Secondly, we think that while it's a fledgling law enforcement effort in Panama because they've had to rebuild institutions there, we think that the Panamanian police and the Panamanian narcotic officers are certainly striving to do a better job in terms of controlling the flow of drugs, particularly cocaine, that's moving into and through Panama. There is still cocaine moving into and through Panama. There's no question about that. But I will say this, that with respect to DEA's assistance and cooperative efforts with the Panamanian law enforcement, I can say that there hasn't been a single investigation that we're aware of that's been compromised. And that could not have been said under the regime of General Noriega.
We're joined now by Robert Mueller, the Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division of the Justice Department. Also joining us is Bruce Bagley, the Associate Dean of the Graduate School of International Studies for the University of Miami. Mr. Bagley is also the Director of the university's North-South Center on Drug Trafficking and has been watching the trial since it began. Mr. Attorney General, the defense says it will appeal the verdict on many grounds that were dealt with, as we just heard, during the trial. The legality and international law of seizing Noriega, his claim to have been a prisoner of war, and so on. What is the Justice Department reaction to the prospect of a long appeals process?
Well, quite obviously, we expect an appeal, but we expect also to be successful on appeal. Judge Hoovler rendered many opinions in the course of this case, and each one, we think, was fully supported by the law and will stand up under scrutiny.
Supported under U.S. law or other law?
United States law.
United States law. Do you have any anxiety that under other law, the seizing of Noriega and his treatment as a criminal and brought to justice in the United States may be illegal?
No, I do not believe that to be the case at all. I think it was wholly legal.
This is estimated to have been, if not the most expensive, one of the most expensive cases ever brought in U.S. legal history. Considering that, on top of the cost of the military operation which seized Noriega and the loss of human life involved, was this verdict worth it today?
Well, I think you have to look and separate out the various rationales for Operation Just Cause. And first and foremost, it was to restore democracy in Panama. As a part of that operation, we had the opportunity and utilized that opportunity to effectuate the arrest of Manuel Noriega. And certainly the effort that has been put into the case by the prosecutors, by the investigators, to bring Manuel Noriega to justice is well worth that portion of the effort.
Mr. Bagley, President Bush said this was a major victory against the drug lords today. In terms of its effect on the drug trade, is the Noriega conviction worth the effort to you?
I think there's very little evidence for that position. The facts of the matter are that the drug trafficking process through Panama continues and in fact has increased very substantially. And there is no evidence whatsoever that the overall process of cocaine trafficking from the Andean region and from Colombia into the United States has been significantly affected at all. I think that we could draw a similar parallel with the arrest and conviction of the top drug lord Carlos Lehrer of the Medellin cartel. I think that arresting and convicting individual top capos of the cartel organizations or individual traffickers in specific countries is not at all convincing as a way of addressing the question of cocaine trafficking into the United States.
You just heard the head of the Drug Enforcement Agency say that drug money laundering through Panama had been drastically reduced since Noriega's arrest.
Frankly, I've been reading very carefully the government documents that have been generated by that, and there are a number of reports that have come out in the press as well that indicate that the United States has had considerable difficulties with Panamanian authorities in clamping down on money laundering in Panama. If we assume for the moment that there has been some success on that front, I think that one has to raise the issue of the balloon effect of these kinds of activities. We have driven, without any doubt, some of the previous money launderers out of Panama, but we have seen it emerge in other parts of the world, and in fact we've got a kind of shell game going on around the globe in which we force both drug trafficking activities and cultivation, as well as money laundering from one country into another. And in some senses, I think that we've begun to proliferate these processes throughout Central America, that we see it throughout the Caribbean, and that we see it in other parts of the world as well. So we have not stopped money laundering, even if we stopped it in Panama.
Mr. Mueller, what do you say to Mr. Bagley's comments? One, that arresting capos doesn't have any effect on the cocaine trade, and that, well, you just heard what he said about the money laundering, that it just balloons elsewhere.
I absolutely disagree. In the last 3 to 4 years, with the assistance of the Colombians, we have had a substantial effect on the Medellin cartel and disrupted that cartel and effectively stopped its ability to ship cocaine in the United States. Panama is no longer a safe haven for the Medellin cartel or other cartel members. It is no longer the transit point that it once was when Manuel Noriega was in charge, and that is a substantial success in the war on drugs. But I'm not here to say that there are not failures and that it doesn't go on elsewhere. But it is our responsibility, and what we intend to pursue and pursue relentlessly is drug cartels and drug traffickers wherever they may be. And we can't, and I don't expect that anyone would want us to fold up our tents and walk away from it.
Mr. Bagley, you dispute that the Medellin cartel has been seriously interfered with, and that drug traffic from Colombia has been reduced?
Those are two separate issues. I think that the Medellin cartel has been, in some senses, severely constrained, primarily by the plea bargaining arrangements that were set up and the decision of various top bosses to accept President Cesar Gaviria's offers to allow them to plead guilty to a single count in Colombia. Pablo Escobar, the Ochoa brothers, are in jail. There is some evidence that they continue to traffic out of the jail facilities in which they operate. Even more important, in Colombia, we have seen a very substantial increase in the market share of the Cali cartel. So the drug trafficking is certainly alive and well and continuing in Colombia, even if the Medellin cartel has been cut down to size somewhat. In that context, then, I think that the entire policy of interdiction and supply-side approaches really must be readdressed. The central problems here are that as long as there is a continuing demand and a huge market of $50 billion or more in the United States, we are going to see poor third-world countries, whether Panama, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, other parts of the world, continuing to traffic. I think that we have failed as a country, and I include, this is not an indictment to the Bush administration or any other specific government. I think that the United States as a society must more effectively address the demand side of this issue. We must be able to rein in the profitability of this industry before any of the overseas or international drug control efforts are going to have any permanent effect on drug trafficking into this country.
Mr. Mueller?
Well, I don't disagree at all that we must emphasize the demand side. But on the other side, on the supply side, you cannot forget that the Ochoa brothers, Pablo Escobar, found a safe haven in Panama, principally because Manuel Noriega, as the dictator of that country, was willing to give them that safe haven. And today, Manuel Noriega stands convicted before the bar of justice, and that is a substantial success in the war on drugs, not just for the United States, but for the world community.
Mr. Bagley, what is your feeling, as somebody who follows the whole drug industry, what is your feeling about the witnesses the government used to get this conviction, former drug dealers, and the deals made with them, and the impact of that on the drug trade?
Well, I think that it's a double-edged sword. It is quite clear that in order to get witnesses to testify against drug traffickers, that U.S. prosecutors are going to have to deal with a very nefarious group of people. In that sense, it's inevitable that deals be struck with people who are former drug traffickers or murderers or others. On the other hand, the extraordinary effort that the United States government made and the very costly deals, I mean, there is a large amount of money that has been paid to people in the witness program. There have been major concessions made to a number of traffickers who have already been convicted. I think that we have a kind of mixed signal being sent. In order to get people higher up the chain, such as Noriega, a whole series of individuals have been partially exonerated from previous crimes, and that's a way out of paying the price to society for their previous activities. If we are going to multiply this effort going after only the Noriegas of the world, I think a whole lot of middle range and upper middle range traffickers will get off or have major concessions made to their families.
Let me go back to the Assistant Attorney General on that. Do you have any qualms about the amount of money you've paid, the concessions you've made to some of these already convicted drug traffickers, which include murderers, for instance, giving green cards to some of their families to come to the United States and so on in order to get this conviction?
Well, number one, you have to realize, as I think has already been acknowledged, that the only way that you are going to be able to successfully prosecute a drug kingpin is to find persons who are willing to testify against that drug kingpin, because drug kingpins do not want to get near to the drugs or the money. And in this case, it was necessary to elicit the testimony from those who had operated with Manuel Noriega. Now, contrary to what has been said out there, almost every one of these individuals is facing substantial time in jail, most of them with a cap of 20 years. And if they're in their 40s or 50s, 20 years is a very, very long time. With regard to payments to the Witness Protection Program, the person is put into the Witness Protection Program because there is a very realistic fear that that individual will be harmed, or if not that individual's family. And when a green card is provided to a family member who is in Colombia, it is given for the purpose of that family member being able to move away from a situation in which that person's life would be very much at risk.
Well, Mr. Mueller and Mr. Bagley, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Still to come, ethnic conflict in a former Yugoslav republic, a political talk with Walter Mondale, and an Amai Wallach essay. We turn next to the continuing civil war in the country that used to be Yugoslavia. The fighting now is going on in the Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which declared independence on March 1st. Some 4 million Serbs, Croats, and Muslims live there. This week, the European community and the United States recognized Bosnian independence, but Serbian paramilitary forces have been fighting to keep as much land in Serbian control as possible. They did the same in Croatia before a ceasefire was reached there. So far, an estimated 10,000 people have been killed in the Yugoslav civil war, mostly in Croatia. More than 150 have died in fighting in Bosnia over the past month. Liz Donnelly of Independent Television News prepared this report, which begins in the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo.
The bombardment of the medieval city of Sarajevo by Serb irregular forces positioned in the hills above has prompted the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina to declare a state of emergency. By early evening, local people virtually abandoned the streets to the gunmen. For almost a year, the Croats, Muslims and Serbs, who lived here peacefully side by side, watched the war next door in Croatia with horror. Now they too are the victims. We were taken to an underground cafe in the heart of the predominantly Muslim old part of the city. 100 or so families are packed inside, and they told us they'd been too frightened to leave their shelter all week. These people are Muslim, and their distress is acute. They put the blame on the Yugoslav Federal Army, who they accuse of giving heavy weapons to the Serb fighters. What they fear most is a war between heavily armed Serbs and Croats, with Muslims caught in the middle. This man told us he remembered the Second World War, when the whole of Yugoslavia was occupied. This never happened before, he said. The German occupation army didn't fire like this. This was a Muslim place for 500 years, and now they're firing at us every night. They're firing at our homes. My brother was killed defending the city and no one could reach us, this woman explained. Even 5 doctors were captured with us. We're all going through great traumas. We don't deserve to have to keep 300 of our children down here with us. I have 2 children and I want my children to be happy, along with Serb and Croat children. Those who did venture out during today are shocked at the speed with which the situation has deteriorated. With virtual anarchy prevailing at night, more than 60 shops have been destroyed and their contents looted. And in the normally busy marketplace, there were very few things to buy, just some cabbage and fruit. For Serbs living in Sarajevo, who make up more than 1/3 of the population, the situation is equally confusing.
Crazy people. I don't know what he wants. This in Sarajevo. This is my town. These people not live in this city. I live here. I don't know what he wants, what he needs.
Inside the President's building, what remains of Bosnia-Herzegovina's leadership has been tied up all day in a series of crisis meetings. The 2 Serb members of the presidency, who resigned earlier this week, have left their colleagues, 3 Muslims and 2 Croats, to run the country. Until now, leaders like Stjepan Ključ have shown a remarkable ability to juggle the conflicting demands of the different ethnic groups here. He puts the blame for the current crisis squarely on Belgrade.
Srpski narod je u suštini za Bosnu i Hercegovinu, ali Srpska demokratska stranka.
The Serbs want an independent Bosnia, but the Serbian Democratic Party and its leaders, who are under the control of Belgrade, don't want independence, so that Slobodan Milosevic can keep his imperialistic control over Yugoslavia. If Bosnia becomes independent, Milosevic, who started the civil war in Yugoslavia, will have lost territory. He lost Macedonia, he lost Croatia. The only remaining Serbian empire is in Bosnia.
Away from Sarajevo, irregular Serb forces have launched an offensive against predominantly Muslim villages here in the north of the country. Serbs, who make up 1/3 of the population of Bosnia-Herzegovina, are claiming 50% of the territory. There's been heavy fighting here in Bijeljina, one of the first predominantly Muslim towns to be attacked by the Serbs, and until today it's been completely sealed off. EC monitors who came to investigate allegations of a massacre were turned away by Serbian roadblocks. We found evidence of several battles, which locals say took place here last weekend. Muslims, too frightened to appear in front of our camera, told us more than 40 people were missing. But at the town hall, where the Serbian flag shows clearly who's taken control, they tell a very different story. The local leader of the irregular Serb forces says the trouble was started by Muslims, but even so, the Serbs want to live in peace and don't want to drive them out.
There was no massacre of Muslims. Many people were killed, Serbs, Croats, and Muslims, but there was no massacre.
Since the capture of Bijeljina last week, Serb forces have extended their control across the northeast section of the republic. The Bosnian president has appealed for a ceasefire.
Next, the Democratic presidential race. Bill Clinton's victories in Tuesday's primaries give him almost an insurmountable lead in delegates. He now has almost 60% of the 2,145 delegates needed to win the nomination. The Associated Press gives Clinton a total of 1,267 to Jerry Brown's 264 and Paul Tsongas's 539. In addition to the delegates selected in the last 3 months, there are 772 so-called superdelegates, party leaders and office holders. Almost 400 of them have not committed to any candidate yet, and Clinton's strategists are putting pressure on them to rally around the presumptive nominee. One of the superdelegates is former Vice President Walter Mondale, the Democratic presidential nominee in 1984. I spoke with him late this afternoon. Mr. Vice President, thank you for being with us.
Good to be here.
You were quoted in the New York Times as saying that right now, as of then, that Bill Clinton's performances in New York and the other states weren't decisive enough yet, as you put it, to end this nightmare. What did you mean by that?
Well, I was afraid that even though Clinton had done well and carried all of these states, that it wasn't quite the margin that would permit him to say, let's end this now and unite the party and go on. I still hope that that's what will happen. It was a good victory. He piled up a lot of new delegates. He won all of these contests. And I think the time has come to end this fight.
Are you saying then his performance is decisive?
I'm saying I would like to have seen it a little bit stronger, but I think it's still enough. After we've had all these primaries, he's won most of them. This fight is starting to tear us apart and diminish our chances of winning, and I hope that we can end it.
Is he the nominee? Is he on a clear path?
He's not there yet, but he's almost there. If you look at the statistics of where he is now, he could lose all the upcoming primaries and still win enough delegates. So I think, for all practical purposes, he is the presumptive nominee.
And yet, as we keep reading and we keep hearing, it's almost as if the more Bill Clinton wins, the better he does, the more doubts that are raised about him by party officials, by the pundits and everybody else.
This is where I think